Well, good afternoon, everyone. The President has called the Speaker and Leader Pelosi and the Majority Leader and myself down for a meeting tomorrow afternoon, presumably, to discuss the situation in Iraq. I'm anxious to see what plan he may have, given where we are. But it certainly underscores the significance of the President reversing the decision he previously indicated he had made for us to leave Afghanistan entirely. We know that if we don't leave behind a deployment that the military has recommended in Afghanistan of roughly 10,000 troops for counterterrorism purposes and training purposes, you're likely to see the same kind of meltdown in Afghanistan that we've seen in Iraq. So I hope the President, at least looking to the future, has learned something from this and will reverse his decision to leave Afghanistan entirely. And second, I'm anxious to see what recommendations he has for how we, at this point, help the Iraqi government prevent the takeover of the entire country by an extremely dangerous terrorist group.
I'm glad the President has asked Vice President Biden to go to Central America to talk to the countries of that region about the unaccompanied minors, the wave of unaccompanied minors that are coming into the United States. It's estimated about 47,000 so far this year have been detained, and then it's estimated that as many as 120,000 will come next year, directly as a result of the failure of the administration to clearly set out that it will enforce our immigration laws as they're currently written. It's clear, based on Secretary Johnson's testimony, that the deferred action announcement in 2012 would not apply to these children. In other words, it's still illegal for them to enter the country. But we're learning on an almost regular basis that adults who come with children are given a notice to appear 90 days hence for a court proceeding, and very few of them show back up and essentially melt into the American landscape. So the impression is that America is not going to enforce its laws. This is creating a humanitarian crisis that has spread beyond the border regions, beyond places like Oklahoma, California, Arizona, and now Maryland and Virginia are being asked to accommodate these children, these minors, while they're being processed. It's overwhelming our ability to deal with this. The President needs to take a firm step to deal with it. So far, he's done nothing other than sending Vice President Biden to Central America, but I hope he convenes a meeting after the plan on Iraq to talk about this humanitarian crisis that just keeps growing and growing.
Well, the President is going to Pennsylvania to talk about manufacturing jobs, and if I'm somebody in the audience in Pennsylvania, I guess the question I'd be asking is, where's the recovery and where are the jobs? Because this is the 4th anniversary of Recovery Summer. Some of you may remember back in 2010, the President, the Vice President, Secretary Geithner all came out and said this is Recovery Summer. And the unemployment rate's going to start coming down, and we're going to start creating 250,000 to 500,000 jobs a month. Well, none of that has happened. And obviously, the President's policies have contributed to a very sluggish economy. You have 3.7 million more women in poverty today than you did when the President took office. The unemployment rate for young people is literally more than twice what the national average is for everybody. And household incomes are down by $3,500. So I don't know how you can argue that there's been any kind of a recovery. I think most Americans are going to be asking the question, where's the recovery and where are the jobs? And furthermore, instead of going up and I don't know what he's going to talk about in terms of a manufacturing agenda, because everything that they do is counter to creating jobs in the manufacturing sector of our economy. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, the President came out with this new national energy tax, which is going to drive up the cost of manufacturing in this country at a time when we're starting actually to see businesses bring jobs back into this country because we have a competitive advantage. Energy is a competitive advantage when you're producing energy here at home instead of importing it. Well, with the president's new energy tax, it's going to make that energy a lot more expensive, and it's going to be creating jobs a lot more expensive in this country, and it's going to make that recovery that they were taking credit for 4 years ago a lot longer off in the horizon.
Well, last Friday, the president was questioned about what's happened in Iraq and the impact of that on world oil prices, which had spiked. And the president's answer was that they would rely on other countries in the Gulf to pick up the slack. And the president then flew from here to North Dakota, which is part of the energy capital of the United States. And when he was there, he didn't look at anything related to energy. So when the president has to choose between American sources of energy and the Persian Gulf sources of energy, his approach is to forget about American energy and focus on getting more energy from the Gulf. When you take a look at American energy, Keystone Pipeline is a big part of that. The president ought to be approving that today. It is on his desk. He can make that approval, but yet tomorrow in the Energy Committee under Chairman Landrieu is going to be voting on the Keystone XL pipeline. To me, this is a political stunt. It is a show vote by Senator Landrieu in an effort to show her so-called clout as chair of that committee. The reality is that Harry Reid continues to block a vote on the floor of the Senate. The president continues to oppose the Keystone XL pipeline. So Mary Landrieu can bring this vote up every day from now till the end of the year, and it's not going to mean anything because it's obvious that the people that are really supportive and pushing for this pipeline are the Republican members of the Senate.
Well, on the work we hopefully will get to today, I believe that Senator Mikulski and Senator Shelby are working hard and arguing hard that we should get back to the constitutional process of how we spend people's money, how we set our priorities. If you were elected to the Senate in 2006 or have come to the Senate since then, 2006 you'd be starting your 8th year in the Senate. You haven't seen the appropriations process work one single time the way it essentially worked for 200 years before that, where the bills are brought to the floor. Every member of the Senate is allowed to challenge the spending in all of those bills any way they want to. You vote on those amendments, you set your priorities, and if it's 8 years since you've done the work the way it's supposed to be done, frankly, it's pretty easy to forget why it is you're for what you're for. Getting back to the way that this is supposed to be done would be one of the very best things that the Senate and the Congress could do for the country. And I hope that Senator Mikulski and Senator Shelby are effective in arguing these bills need to come to the floor. Members need to be allowed to challenge them. We then need to move forward with the priorities that have been set for people in the public and constitutional way that essentially was followed for a couple of hundred years until about 8 years ago.
Senator McConnell, the Benghazi suspect who is now in U.S. custody, what should happen if you agree with the plan to try and recover?
Well, first, I congratulate those who were involved in capturing this guy. I think that's a significant step. He needs to be interrogated extensively, and I hope that will occur. There has been a tendency in this administration, as you know, to treat this like a law enforcement matter. Read them their rights and get them a lawyer. I hope they're not doing that. The most valuable thing we can get from this terrorist is information about who else was involved in it. We'll be watching closely to see how much information they glean from him and how they're handling it.
Leader McConnell, there have been a number of devastating school shootings lately. Has there been any movement in your party on this issue, particularly on things that most Americans say they support, like strengthening background checks or closing the gun show loophole?
Well, we know that the mental condition of these shooters is a matter of national concern. And I think there's broad bipartisan support for doing everything we can to try to identify as early as possible people who have these kinds of mental challenges. And that's the kind of thing we could probably reach a pretty broad agreement on a bipartisan basis.
So making it harder for them to get it done?
Do you have any suggestions for the president on what to do in Iraq?
I know what he should have done. I addressed that earlier. He should have left a deployment behind, not for combat purposes, but for training and for counterterrorism. Having made the decision not to do that, we're left with entirely predictable consequences. I'm anxious to hear what he has to say. He's the President of the United States about what we do confronted with this situation now. Looking forward, let's don't do it again in Afghanistan. When you have even the former Secretary of State saying over the weekend she's open to continuing the deployment in Afghanistan beyond the date that the President has suggested, that tells you that even inside the Democratic Party, there's pretty widespread recognition that entirely pulling out of Iraq and jeopardizing all that had been accomplished over all of those years was a terrible mistake. I look forward tomorrow to hear what the President has to say about where we go from here on Iraq.